Today's episode is sponsored by Datadog, a modern full-stack monitoring platform for cloud infrastructure, applications, and logs metrics, all in one place. From their recent report on serverless adoption and trends, Datadog found half their customer base using EC2s have now adopted AWS Lambda. They've examined real-world serverless usage by thousands of companies running on millions of distinct serverless functions, and they found that half of the Lambda invocations run for less than 800 milliseconds. You can easily monitor all your serverless functions in one place and generate serverless metrics straight from Datadog. Check it out yourself by signing up for a free 14-day trial and get a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/HanselMinutesShow to get started. That's datadog.com/HanselMinutesShow to get started. Hi, this is Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Jayson Phillips. He's the Director of Engineering of Online Boot Camps at 2U and an instructor at a full-stack dev boot camp. How are you, sir?
Doing good, Scott. How about yourself?
Very well. I am still remote, still here in Portland, working remotely now for 13 years. And you actually have worked remote for a number of years, but also managing teams and projects.
Yes, I've been working remote for about 3 years now. Started off with a web dev team at Trilogy Education Services, which we got rolled into 2U via acquisition. And from there, I helped pilot our first online offering where we were teaching live via Zoom. So have definitely had to enjoy the advantages of remote, but also figure out how to make it work best for me.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a really great thread that you started and gave it a little kick, and it's kind of a little viral thread where you said, I've been working remote, and it was one of those one of N where you just kind of like dumped onto Twitter until you ran out of steam, and you had a lot of great tips and a lot of great interaction with folks because you were giving us all the tips to be effective as a remote worker. And I've always talked about this kind of dystopian joy of being a remote worker because it's amazing because you're like 10 feet from your office, but
Right.
It totally sucks because you're like 10 feet from your office.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges I think, as you just mentioned, is knowing when to turn it on and when to turn it off, right? Of the convenience of quote unquote rolling over in bed and starting your day is great. But when you go at remote working for a while, you start to realize that you can end up in a place where you just don't know how to set that boundary of my day is over or my day has started. And for me, that was particularly challenging. And so when I saw someone else tweet about remote workers, for instance, taking sick days, that strongly resonated and kind of was the impetus for starting that kind of thread on Twitter of, that's one big example, right? We work from home, we're convenient. So since we can't get anyone sick, why don't we just work while we're sick? And that's really not the best way to think about that.
You said it was important to have an activity that signals the start of your workday. You're almost basically training yourself. Like, how they say, don't watch iPad in bed or don't read in bed because then your brain will say, oh, this is where we watch movies. I will stay awake. You are trying to keep your I am working and I am at home separate.
Yeah. So I try to really recreate the structure, especially after I moved back into working remote after a brief stint in an office of now I know I'm on and I'm starting my day of mimicking the commute, if you will, even if it's 10 steps. And for me, it was really important to kind of establish to my brain and to myself that, okay, as of right now, I am available to be booked for meetings. I'm available to be on and have a team across different time zones that I need to consistently have a start time to be available for. And so over time, that kind of routine really morphed for me into, all right, when I wake up, take my shower, take my medicine, but also take a 5-minute walk around the block, take a walk in the neighborhood, kind of give me that rush of fresh air as if I was commuting. So then when I walk back through the door, my brain's awoken and I'm like, okay, now it's time to kind of start plug in and get ready.
That is really clever. You're basically commuting. You go out, you do a loop, like, Grandpa Simpson, you go in, you go out, and you just go outside and then come back in and then enter your workspace with a fresh perspective as if you have arrived at work.
Yeah, and it also for me was a good way. At first it was, hey, I'm noticing I don't get nowhere near 1,000 steps in a day until noon.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, I've got to break that up. But also, it's like I'm starting work earlier and earlier, and I'm at different levels of energized depending on the day. So for me, that loop was really important. So, yeah, by going out, getting into the neighborhood, seeing the same dogs on their dog walks every morning, it just gave me a routine, and just gave me enough of a shift to really feel like that was the commute.
I like that. I've talked a lot before on the show with other people about this idea of living your life by design rather than living it by default. Some people might be listening and say, well, I like being at home, or I'm an introvert, or I'm a whatever, and I want to be at home. But it's worth trying things. If you simply accept the defaults, you might just roll over and pick up your laptop and then you're online. And if that works for you and feeds your spirit, do it. But why not try a morning walk, or try go to your local breakfast place or your local small business, support them, turn around, come back with your fresh coffee and your fresh perspective.
Yeah, I think, and I think I've seen you say that a couple times too. And I think for me, the way I thought about that is instead of accepting the default being handed to me, it's creating your own default, right? Like you just mentioned,
Exactly.
It's not bad that you have a default. It's that you've said, okay, this is work for me, right? Like it's not given to me. This is what works best for me. Because I think in the beginning, I did accept that default of, hey, I can just roll over, keep my camera off, and take my first 4 meetings of the day from bed. And then it was, all right, well, I'm not eating breakfast and I don't have any energy and I'm not getting out of bed. And now it's noon. And instead of me feeling like I had the convenience and the relaxation of working from bed, I have this dread of, all right, I feel like I've got to start the day, but I haven't gotten up yet. And now, although I've had 4 meetings, I feel like I've had a ton more work just pile up. Like I've not actually gotten into active mode. And then by the end of the day, it's like, all right, it's 5 p.m. Let me start my day when I've already had a full day.
Mm-hmm. I like that you say that it's not about defaults. It's about making them yours. You decided. You intentionalized. You intentionally made those defaults, accepted them. It's always a good idea to look at things that you do, assert your assumptions, as we are taught as software engineers. Like,
right.
Is this really what I need to be doing? And if it is, cool, keep doing it. But like, if you catch yourself going, wow, I don't know how that happened, but for 3 days in a row, I took meetings in bed. And that doesn't work for me. Therefore, I am going to consciously decide not to do that.
Yeah. Then some of it too was, having others point that out to me as well. Like, my therapist would say at a certain point, hey, have you tried like at lunchtime, just taking a 30-minute walk? You love taking hikes. You can't get out for a full hike, but there's a park nearby. Walk to the park and then walk back. So, just even accepting that input, again, allows you to not accept that default. Like you said, it allows you to say, okay, I can take the suggestion, but then I can make it my own.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I get teased about on Twitter, but it has become one of my defaults, is the idea of wearing dress shoes. I wear dress shoes in my house to my office, because it is those shoes that represent work to me. And then if I'm out in the world, I might wear trainers or sneakers or whatever, but I will not wear kicks in my office. It is my office. And that is just my little weird thing, but it helps me keep things separate.
Yeah, for me, it's 2 things in particular. One is a big bottle full of water, as like my default at the desk of I'm starting my day. And the second is wearing a hoodie. I mean, It's very, very Bay Area, right? That's so like Oakland and San Francisco. But I find that just even that notion of walking out the house, then walking back in and keeping the hoodie on, it again gives me that feel of like I just walked into the office. It's my, for lack of a better phrase, my Mr. Rogers moment.
It's your suit, though. It's your blazer. It's the thing that represents work to you, and you put it on. Yeah, and Mr. Rogers, he would take a sweater off and put a different sweater on, but it was a separate sweater.
Always made me wonder about that as a kid, but it made sense.
Well, the red sweater is one thing, and the blue is another. Man, I mean, it's so obvious.
Yeah, and it's that that thread that we're talking about of signaling the start of an episode and the end, right? It's signaling to him talking to us versus him going off and going back into the world.
And you mentioned in that thread that working remote doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. And I think we as the remote workers are so eager to please, that we tend to think that there are no boundaries. And we take meetings at times when non-remotes would just say, well, no, I'm not working right there. I'm not in the office.
Yeah, I think one big thing that can become that blocker or bring that tension is this idea that you have this privilege and convenience just from working from home. And while you do in a lot of ways in terms of your choice of environment, it doesn't mean you haven't earned your boundaries, right? Or that you don't have the right to have the same structure that maybe your colleagues in the office do have. And so, if you say from 8 to 10 a.m., you don't take any meetings because that's the best time for you to do your administrative work, you don't have to feel bad about that just because you work from home. It's, those boundaries are not about where you do the work. It's about how you do the work. And that's really, I know for me, that was really tough to wrap my head around the first year that I worked remote. I almost felt bad that I didn't make myself available for a 9 a.m. meeting because, well, I'm at home. I didn't have to commute. But again, I think that's the wrong way, at least for me, to think about it in terms of how I set that boundary and just knowing that, hey, 9 a.m. is my best email time. Like, I don't need no other interruptions until my first team meeting at 9:30.
Yeah. I think that I have remote worker low self-esteem, where I feel guilty because I can pick my kids up at school at 3. And I feel guilty that my coworkers that live in Seattle drive an hour to get to work or whatever they do. So then I overcompensate by working hours that are not reasonable hours. And I have found that to be pretty consistent of remote workers that also, I don't know if the right phrase is remote workers low self-esteem, but there's a little paranoia that I think we have as remotes.
Yeah, and it's understandable, right? It's like, well, I have this unfound freedom that most people don't. But in the same token, it's, when we do commute to an office, we have a choice at times or relatively speaking, we can have a choice of going earlier, of going later, depending on the environment. And so, I think for me, it was helpful to also think about, well, if someone has an hour commute to get to the office, then I should take an hour before I start my day, to do the same personal things, get my coffee, make my breakfast, and also promote habits that I know I wouldn't do in the office. Like, in the office, I don't eat during most meetings, right? That wouldn't be a thing that I personally would do. And so I don't want to carry that at home. Like, I want my lunchtime and my breakfast time to be my time. And so if I know my teammates are commuting from 8 to 9 a.m., then my burden, quote unquote, will be to do my personal stuff from 8 to 9 a.m.
That is smart. It's about being conscious and being thoughtful and thinking about how you feel about a situation, how others might feel about that situation, applying empathy to it, and then deciding that, okay, this is a decision I made, this is a decision that they made, but I am going to set boundaries, because otherwise, if there are no boundaries, then the work is going to consume me.
Yeah, and then you don't take those steps back to, take the space to think through problems if you're in engineering or in any field, really, right? You don't really get to do the things that you would normally do, right? Which I think brings me to another point that I was talking about in that thread that's related, is taking frequent small breaks, right? I know in a lot of office settings, there's always the challenge of, there's folks who take smoke breaks. And I used to tell everyone, whether you smoke or not, no matter what your voice is or what you do, always take a smoke break or take a break, right? Walk, stretch your legs, go meet somebody in a different department. You can do the same thing remotely. You can, if you still want to be connected, you could step away from the desk. If you have a work device where you have, you're connected to your teammates, whether it's Slack or Microsoft Teams or another product, you can still kind of have water cooler chat with your teammates while walking around the block. But getting away from the screen, much like you would in an office, is really important to me. For me, it was to mimic, so that, again, I don't fall into that trap of feeling guilty for taking time away just because I work from home and then just getting stuck at the desk for hours on end.
And then you continue by saying, protect your home spaces for rest and recovery. One of the things that I've done that I think is a best practice is that if you have the space, and not everybody has an extra room, I realize that some people have studios or some people have a one bedroom, but I do have an extra room, a den. I designed it, I made it with just a coat of paint and different furniture. It looks like a totally different house. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yep.
The walls are painted different. The furniture is weird. Like even the what would you call these, the blinds do not match anything. Like it looks like you're in a different place. So if you can make your corner of the kitchen or your area or wherever you sit look dramatically different than your home, that's a way of protecting your home space that I've found works for me at least.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, when I was in an apartment where I had a 1 bedroom, but I had a built-in desk, I made sure that I didn't do anything but work at that desk. So even if I was, browsing the web in my off time or anything like that, anything I'm doing personal for comfort, I do from places of comfort, the sofa, right? But when I was in work mode and it was time to be on at the office, I had to do it at that desk. I had to not bring work into my other spaces. And that is hard to do when everything's at home, right? But that is key because you start to remember that, hey, when I walk out of that area or when I walk out of that room, if I have a spare room, that signals the day is over. Unless I'm on call and something's on fire, no, there's no more email. There's nothing getting pushed to our repositories. There's nothing getting deployed. We're done for the day.
Exactly. Do you find that this can't be just us? I mean, we're here, two people talking about what it's like as remote engineers. I mean, this is a thing, right? Like there are other of us that behave this same way and that blur these lines between personal and work. Isn't there a thing about the remote worker being a workaholic of sorts?
Yeah, it's I have a couple of friends who work remote for some companies that are back east that are not in engineering, and they've kind of had similar friction points too. You fall into that trap of, well, I don't have a commute, so I can take an extra hour of work, and so I can take a meeting till 6 p.m. And that's not fair to you if you know that you would have a hard stop at 5 p.m. to leave the office to be home by 6 p.m. Right? And just the ease of being able to turn the laptop on and off without the friction of commute or of, an elevator, even in the building, taking 5 minutes to come downstairs. You have to put some other friction in place to protect your space and to not fall into that trap of overwork. I know I was notoriously bad at this the first year and a half, maybe even 2 years. Teaching and doing that at night kind of helped me get that because I'm teaching a course from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Oh, no.
After having worked from 9 to 5. And so I had to maximize that hour from 5 to 6 before office hours so that I could eat dinner or I could step away and drink water or take a walk or get some fresh air or, interact with people. And just while it would seem that doing 2 remote jobs could make that worse, fatigue and having to listen to my own needs actually made that a forcing function for me to maximize the times in between each opportunity.
Yeah, interesting. How do you deal with sick days and with illness? Because I have found, as my entire team is remote, I've got a team of 6, all remote, and hopefully I'm not calling them out in public, but they're all pretty lousy about when they're sick, they're still in bed answering email. It seems like since you're already in bed answering email as a remote or wherever you are, you think to yourself, well, I can't be sick in my house. My hands still work. I should be working.
Yeah. I will say that my team's been great at forcing me to practice what I preach. Whenever someone's sick, I just tell them, look, shut the laptop off, go to bed. If there's anything we need, there's another tech lead somewhere, there's another engineer somewhere, and there's another designer somewhere. There's always someone on your team who can back you up. And so our team has really had I've been fortunate with this team to really have a culture that we've built together to say, as soon as someone even mentions that they even have so much as a migraine, it's, hey, don't tough out the migraine. If you have medication for it, take it, go. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not on the front lines like an EMT. We're not, you taking a sick day is not going to result in people losing lives. And I think that's a really important thing for us to kind of at times keep in mind is what are the ramifications of taking care of myself versus the flip side, which is you overworking and extending your sickness could actually make whatever it is you're going through worse, which is more time away for you, but also more time away for you in that same sickness. So now forget the fact that you're away from the office for an extended period because you've been working while you're sick, you yourself are now could potentially be in a worse place because you haven't let your body rest, because you haven't given yourself a time to recover. And at the end of the day, that matters more. That's more important, right? That we come back refreshed, that we come back healthy, and then we can kind of jump in and pick up where we left off.
I did a blog post. It was called "Software and Saving Babies," and your website that sells widgets is very likely not saving babies. So unless you work on like full-time baby saving software, then you can probably take a break. You know what I mean? Like there are mission critical things. I get that, but at the same time, the sicker you get, the tireder you get, we know the quality goes down. So you got to take care of yourself, even if you're a remote. I totally agree.
Yeah, and think about it this way: when someone in ER who could be the best surgeon on their floor, is sick, they're not going to go operate on someone. They're going to go home because they're not going to do their best work while they themselves are feeling sick.
Exactly. I'd like to welcome our new sponsor, Couchbase. Couchbase is an open source NoSQL document and key value store database. Requires no external cache, supports SQL and analytical queries for JSON data. Couchbase supports technologies like Kubernetes, Java, .NET, JavaScript, Go, and Python. Download it, give it a try at couchbase.com/HanselMinutes. That's couchbase.com/HanselMinutes. And I'll remind you that when you support our sponsors, you support this show. Another weird thing that at least people tell me it's weird that I do is I will go to the mall and sit in the food court just to have people around, just to hear the din and the electrical energy of people in the room. Do you get cabin fever?
Yes. So everyone's running joke, which is also very true, is that I spend all of my free time at Target. But ironically, it's one of the places where, there's a Starbucks in there. So I run in there and I grab an iced coffee. But there's the people. There's always something new to buy at Target, which I have to get away from. That's a whole separate other episode.
Yeah, that's a whole show right there. How to not buy things at Target is an entirely separate episode. But yeah, for those of you who are not Americans, Target is the everything store, and there's always something at Target. It's very hard to go into Target with $1 and not leave minus 10.
Exactly. But yeah, that just the energy of having other people around is very important. So a lot of times, what I would do is I would always drive. If I knew I wanted a particular cup of coffee, maybe I didn't feel like making it, I would drive and make sure I'd go somewhere that was busy, which would be probably anti what most people would do. They'd be like, oh, let me go to the coffee shop that's the least busy so I can get in and get out. And for me, it's if I'm going to take the 15 minutes and I'm going to actually burn the gas, then let me actually kind of feel what it's like to be out and amongst the people for the day. Another thing I've done is start to prioritize meetups. One advantage of being, a remote worker and working from home is that because I don't have a commute, I can make it to a few more things. So why not go out and not even just for the networking aspect and, trying to go super far in a career, but just being around and sharing ideas with others and being creative with others and learning from others. Just that you get that sense of connection that you don't get if you just stay in the house the entire time. My doctor also prescribed me a weekly outdoor meetup. He said, you need more fresh air and you need more vitamin D. Your vitamin D is low. So then that's the other aspect too, is that also being out and connecting with other people, even if it's just being in their company, is also good for your health.
This is kind of related and kind of unrelated, but I've always talked about how important it is to go to small businesses. So I will always pick a small business over a large business. I'll pick a small coffee shop that's owned by a human rather than Starbucks, with all due respect to our corporate overlords. And in doing that as a remote worker, it has allowed me to build relationships with small business owners where, it's like if you remember the show Cheers, when Norm would come in, Norm, you can support a small business, a local business, your local bodega, your local coffee shop, and you will feel that friendship, that genuine friendship when you enter their space. And then, of course, they won't give you the side eye when you use their Wi-Fi for an hour.
Yeah, that's a very great point. Whether you choose the super big box spot or the small one, something as small as someone knowing your order when you first walk in is such a, for me, especially being a remote worker now, it's such a reaffirming thing of like, oh, I have some sort of connection with this person. Yeah, it's, we have this business transaction, right?
Right.
I hand them money, they hand me food and or coffee. But there's also the, hey, Jason, you're back again. I know who you are. How you been?
Exactly.
And or I walk in, hey, barista, how's your life? How's it going? How's class? Like, you build those connections, and we're not all going to be super close friends, but that's not even the point of it. It's just that just for that few minutes, you have that connection spark that you otherwise won't have if you stay holed up in your office.
Right, and that becomes your water cooler. And you make a point that yes, you're not going to be best friends with the barista at the coffee shop, just as you're not necessarily going to be BFFs with your coworkers. But you do need that virtual water cooler. My remote team, we try not to do work all the time on Teams or on Slack. We actually have a WhatsApp that is the non-work WhatsApp. That's where the memes and the goofiness happens. Work doesn't happen in WhatsApp, but that is our back channel of silliness, so that we can at least build some culture and some camaraderie.
Yeah, we've even brought some of that into our like ritual meetings. So every Friday stand up, for a while it was called Treat Yourself Fridays, where someone had to be on camera showing whatever treat they were going to treat themselves for that Friday, whether it was ice cream or frozen yogurt or cake or a new, something new that they wanted to buy. Just kind of creating that non-work connection aspect. We've shifted it this year. So this year we're going to start with trips we're taking, because we talk a lot about travel in our chats and talks before we, get down to business. So now it's like, hey, every Friday, someone will just spend a minute or two and just talk about somewhere cool they want to go, somewhere they've been, or somewhere they are planning to go. Just creating, again, like you said, those back channels and those non-work connection points and streams for us to still relate to each other as people, much like you would in an office. Especially since, when you have meetings in an office, you usually have, I've got to walk to the 8th floor, or I've got to go down to 12, or, you have all these different points where you're in close proximity to, but also in so many different connection points with other people. And, even just the small talk that happens before the person who organized the meeting walks in, you want to not necessarily recreate that, but have that same effect in different ways.
And it seems like a small thing. Some people might be listening and thinking that these are silly advices and things like that. But as remotes, I don't think people who are not remote realize how isolating, how much of a hermit, how easy it is to not leave the house for a week at a time. With all the video conferencing and Zoom and Slack and whatnot we can do, I might not see a human for a week or two. And honestly, introverts or not, I don't think that's healthy. So doing these small things and these camaraderie building activities has a lot of value.
Yeah, and it also builds trust. A trust that you build, I won't say easier, but perhaps not as visibly when
more
you're
readily.
when you're in actual space with each other in person, right? Because I'll see you all the time, and you'll be in the same meetings as myself, or we will always talk together when X has been completed. So over time, you can make the visual and the physical association with these colleagues equals things we're doing, and we've done it together. And so we have that trust. We have that at least work bond. And when everyone is sometimes just words on a screen, you do need those other ways to build that same camaraderie.
Definitely. You've also made yourself a kind of a snack bar or a coffee bar. Like we always have that place where you can get a kitchen. There's a kitchen at the office, but you should have a space of your own. You shouldn't just have people deliver you food.
Yeah. So, and this was a challenge for me as well. Now, one thing is I love to cook. I will, try out new cookbooks. I've still got fancy dreams one day of like, all right, when I'm done with my career in tech, I'll open a chicken and waffle food truck, which is maybe about 65% on a real idea at this point, right? But it was important for me to kind of make sure that I had some of the same conveniences that I would in an office. Granted, yes, you are paying for it yourself, but you're also at home, which means you have your own choice. You can have your own snacks. Where sometimes you don't have, you're in an office, you don't have the snacks that you would prefer to have. And it also gives you a point to get up, walk to the kitchen or walk to wherever you keep your snacks and still get a few steps in. They all add up. And you also don't fall into this feeling of everyone in the office has more than what I have, right? if we're going to have this convenience of being in our own space, then let's actually enjoy that space. Now, when it comes to the delivery apps, especially now with the the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats and the Grubhub remotes of the world, it's so easy to never talk to another person except for, hey, thanks for my bag of food.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly true.
And so for me, it was like, all right, I've got to not be on the delivery apps. I will walk to the store and buy a sandwich, or I'll walk to the tea shop, or
cook for yourself, more importantly.
Yeah, or I'll cook, right? I get full control. And, a lot of times, even when we're in spaces where if we're fortunate enough that the companies will provide lunch and or dinner, you're going to buy the same groceries you buy for the most part anyway, because, where, depending on who you're with, where it's roommates, family, friends, whatever, you have to eat outside of the office every day. Mm-hmm. Why not have that same freedom and have a wider range of food to enjoy? And also just that action of cooking for yourself, even if it's just sitting in the kitchen for 2 minutes to heat it up in the oven or microwave, it still gets you away from the screen.
All of this is on your Twitter. I'm going to include a link to this tweet. This is currently your pinned tweet at _JJ Phillips, and we'll make sure that there's links to this in the show notes. And hopefully we'll see a follow-up on this with more detail on your blog.
Yeah, that's the plan. Just recently relaunched, as we talked about off air. It's ripe for some new content. So definitely want to continue this conversation further, because the other thing is, even though I've shared a lot of these tips and, you and I and a lot of others have resonated with it, it doesn't mean that we've stopped, right? There is always more things I can learn, especially you haven't been remote for like 13 years, of even some tweaks and more things I could adapt in my own way and make my own new defaults with.
Absolutely. A lot of great tips here and lots more to come. You can check out Jayson Phillips at _JJ Phillips on Twitter. Again, all that's in the show notes. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.